Morning, all. All right, so we are up to the 1957-1958 season, getting closer and closer to expansion. Expansion, of course, coming in 1967, so we're not too far off. But the Montreal Canadiens continue their dominance. They go back to first in the league and by a mile. They finished 43-17-10, 250 goals scored, 158 goals against, 96 points. Their captain, Maurice Richard, of course, and their coach is Toe Blake, who had been a player with the Montreal Canadiens prior to retiring. They finished the season 11-6-5 in the months of February and March, so they had a strong run down the stretch. The Rangers are a distant second, but they're still second. 32-25-13 record, 195 goals scored, 188 goals against, 77 points. They're coached by Phil Watson. Their captain is Red Sullivan. They finished the season 13-4-4 in the months of February and March. So strong finish for the New York Rangers. For Detroit, 29-29-12 is their record. 70 points, 176 goals scored, 207 goals against. So those numbers are kind of ugly. Jimmy Skinner is still the coach, and Red Kelly is still the captain. They finish up the season 10-7-5 in the months of February and March to finish at 500. Boston, 27-28-15, so 69 points, one game below 500. 199 goals scored, 194 goals against. Milt Schmidt is their coach. Fern Flaman is their captain. They finished the season 10-8-4 in the months of February and March, so they get close to 500 with a decent stretch to end out the season. Chicago, well, things aren't quite as happy in Chicago. They're 24-39-7, 55 points, 163 goals scored, 202 goals against. Randy Pilas is their coach, and they don't have a captain that season. They finish up 7-15-1 in the months of February and March. So tough time for Chicago, but things are going to get better. In Toronto, they bottom out. They finished with 53 points, two less than Chicago, a record of 21-38-11. 192 goals scored and 226 goals against. Billy Ray is their coach. George Armstrong is their captain. They finished the season 5-16-1 in the months of February and March. So one news item that's worth noting this season is that Hartland Molson, yes, of the Molson family, buys 60% of the stock of the Canadiens. So he is majority owner of the Montreal Canadiens at that point, and in 1973 he was actually inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder. So Hartland Molson plays a role with the National Hockey League and its growth from here going forward, and it definitely helps with him being a majority owner of the Montreal Canadiens. The owners, they refuse to recognize the NHLPA. So the union's been formed. Ted Kennedy's at the helm. Ted Lindsay's at the helm. Ted Kennedy, I believe, re-retired at the end of the last season. But yeah, they give the players $7,000 as a base salary, and they give them a couple of basically they hand them a couple of little items like here's something for you, so you guys don't talk about strikes or any of this or the lawsuit. They were actually suing the NHL for running a monopoly, being like they're basically owning these players. They're not giving any other league a chance to start up. Eddie Livingston could have, agreed to that. And definitely, I think there was some merit to this, but the NHLPA backs down. They don't have an official meeting with the NHL about this. It basically is kind of done behind closed doors and quietly. And so the union is not as strong as it would become later. But they're trying. But the owners are doing their best to try to bust the union. That's basically the plan, is to make sure they don't have to deal with the union, which is always a sign that you have a boss that probably should be dealing with a union. So July 10th of 1957, the Red Wings acquire Terry Sawchuk from Boston for Johnny Bucyk. This is a trade that benefits both teams, of course. Bucyk ends up being a legend with the Boston Bruins, and Sawchuk probably should have been in Detroit the whole time, right? It's kind of odd to see him with the Bruins for a couple seasons there. November 9th of 1957, Claude Provost, who of course is a Montreal Canadian, scored 4 seconds into the second period of a game to set the NHL record. So 4 seconds. It's basically just puck drop and in. November 28th of 1957, Gordie Howe scores his 409th career assist. That sets a record, breaks Elmer Locke's record, which of course was 408 assists. October 19th of 1957, Rocket Richard reaches 500 goals. He is, of course, the first NHL player to do so, and he does that in a game that the Habs end up winning 3-1 over the Chicago Blackhawks, the hapless Chicago Blackhawks, as it were. January 18th of 1958, Willie O'Ree. He breaks the color barrier in the NHL. He is the first African American to play a game. He would play a handful of NHL games over his career, of course, and that is a point of discussion about whether or not he should have played more. And I think the stats would show he probably could have played more. But at any rate, O'Ree makes his debut in January of 1958. This is a big rookie season in the National Hockey League. Bobby Hull for Chicago and Frank Mahovlich for Toronto battle it out all season for the Rookie of the Year award. And in the end, it's won by Mahovlich, but Bobby Hull would have the longer, more distinguished career of the two in terms of on-ice production. Dickie Moore would lead the NHL in on-ice production that season, plays 70 games for Montreal, 36 goals, 48 assists for 84 points. Henri Richard, so not Maurice, Henri Richard is now the number 2 scorer in the league. 67 games, 28 goals, 52 assists, 80 points. Andy Bathgate for the Rangers, 65 games, 30 goals, 48 assists for 78 points. Gordie Howe in Detroit is 4th in scoring. 64 games, 33 goals, 44 assists, 77 points. And Bronco Horvath for the Boston Bruins, 67 games, 30 goals, 36 assists, 66 points. Great hockey name right there. In net, Jacques Plante leads the way, 34-14-8 record. And now we'll look at save percentage. Jacques Plante had a .924 save percentage, 9 shutouts. Terry Sawchuk in Detroit again, 29, 29, and 12. .905 save percentage with 3 shutouts. Glenn Hall, now in Chicago, 24, 39, and 7. .906 save percentage and 7 shutouts. Ed Chadwick in Toronto, 21, 38, and 11 record, .894 save percentage, 4 shutouts. Lorne Gump Worsley, 21, 10, and 6 record with the Rangers, .927 save percentage, 4 shutouts. The Hart Trophy that year goes to Gordie Howe of the Detroit Red Wings. The Art Ross, of course, going to Dickie Moore of the Montreal Canadiens. The Calder goes to the aforementioned Frank Mahovlich of the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Norris Trophy goes again to Doug Harvey of the Montreal Canadiens. The Vezina goes to Jacques Plante of the Montreal Canadiens. And the Lady Byng goes to Camille Henry of the New York Rangers. So your league all-stars at the end of the season, down the middle, your first-line center is Henri Richard of the Montreal Canadiens. Jean Beliveau, also of Montreal, the second-line center. On the right side, Gordie Howe of Detroit, first line, and Andy Bathgate of the New York Rangers, second line. So Maurice Richard not in the top 2. Dickie Moore is first-line left winger. Camille Henry, second-line left winger. Of course, Dickie Moore of Montreal. Camille Henry of the Rangers. On the blue line, Bill Gadsby of the Rangers and Doug Harvey of the Montreal Canadiens are your first-team All-Stars. Second-team All-Stars are Fern Flaman of the Boston Bruins and Marcel Pronovost of the Detroit Red Wings. In net, Glenn Hall of Chicago is the first-team All-Star. Despite the record of 24, 39, and 7, they still say, hey, he's the best goaltender. And Jacques Plante of the Montreal Canadiens is the second-team All-Star. So this is where things are interesting looking back, right? Because the Vezina goes to whoever has the lowest goals against average, and that's the team with the lowest goals against average. So that's clearly Montreal. But when they're voting on All-Stars, they say, you know what, Glenn Hall's the best goaltender in the league. So this is one of those things to look back on and say, so would Glenn Hall have won the Vezina if they'd had a vote on it between the general managers? So in the playoffs, semifinals and finals, it's 1 versus 3. And 2 versus 4 yet again. So it's Detroit and Montreal in the first round, not in the Stanley Cup. Montreal makes quick work of the Detroit Red Wings. 8-1 and 5-1 respectively at home. Then they go into Detroit, they win 2-1 in overtime. And then game 4 by a score of 4-3. Montreal sweeps Detroit. Boston and the Rangers. So this is wonky scheduling, meaning circus. The Rangers get the first 2 games at home. 5-3. They win the first one, and then they lose the second one in overtime. 4-3, but then the other 4 games are played in Boston. Not much of a home ice advantage there, is it? Boston wins the first one at home, 5-0, so they go up 2-1. The Rangers win the next game, 5-2 to tie the series, and then Boston wins out 6-1 and 8-2 respectively to win the series in 6. Wonder what would have happened if the circus wasn't in town. In the Stanley Cup final, it's Boston and Montreal, which, yep, bad matchup for Boston. Montreal wins 2-1 in the first game. In the second game, Boston wins 5-2. Boston then goes home and loses game 3 by a score of 3-0. They win game 4 3-1 to tie the series. And then Montreal wins game 5 3-2 in overtime. Montreal wins game 6 in Boston 5-3 to lift the Stanley Cup yet again. The Montreal Canadiens dynasty is rolling. And as you can see, the rest of the NHL is just trying to keep up. And poor Boston keeps getting just shoved aside by the Montreal Canadiens. So there you go, the 1957-58 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.